Hello, my name is Hamlet Dobbins, and this is Memphis Material, an oral history project chronicling the stories of the visual arts in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Material is a podcast celebrating the personal histories, the intimate stories, and the studio practices of some of the people who help shape the creative landscape of our city. The unedited interviews are all recorded at the Memphis Listening Lab, an archival gem located in the majestic crosstown concourse in beautiful Midtown Memphis. The archive and the website are designed by the wonderful Brian Dixon. Um, we don't really have sponsors for this show, but if we pretended that we do have sponsors for the show, the sponsor for today's episode would be Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. If you haven't read this book and you are in the arts or creative in any way, I would urge you to run out and buy this book. Am going to make it mandatory reading for all of my classes next semester. It's a wonderful sort of not an inspirational book, but in the same way that Art and Fear and Questlove's Creative Quest and Rick Rubin's fantastic book on creativity are all wonderful parts of understanding a studio practice. And Lamont's Bird by Bird is totally in the same league as all of those. And it's funny and it's about writing, but really is also about art and of all kinds. And in it, she talks a lot about what we sometimes expect success to look like or feel like. And she talks very honestly and very openly about what success does and doesn't do in terms of a career in the arts. It's a really beautiful book, and as I listened to it, I thought, man, I can't wait for my students to hear this because all of this is really important and really good. And if you're like me and you need it to be on audiobook, Anne Lamont's Bird by Bird is available on audiobook. Now, today's interview is with Jamie Harmon. I've known Jamie Harmon for a long time, and we have a lot of Venn diagram overlaps in our social and professional lives. And a lot of that comes up in today's conversation. One of the things that I'm not sure if I mentioned in this interview is, so I have this other friend, Tom, and Tom has this great line where he says that strobe lights make everybody a good dancer, which is totally true. Strobe lights make anybody a good dancer. So Jamie Harmon's photographs of people in crowds or at events, Jamie Harmon makes everybody look good. I don't know what it is, but anytime I've seen pictures that Jamie has taken out in the world, everybody just looks great. They all look happy and well adjusted. It's a good angle. They look fit. They look well rested. Nobody is caught doing a dumb face. But then, so one thing that's kind of interesting about Jamie is like he came to my birthday party when I turned 40 or something like that, and he took these pictures and they were great. They were all really good. And so I was like, oh man, Jamie, send me all the pictures. I want to see them all. I want to have them all. And he sent like, I don't know how many hundreds of pictures, and the like 80 or so that he had culled it down to were by far the most amazing photographs taken of the people that I love. But then those other, like, I don't know how many hundreds of pictures were, they looked super dopey. So Jamie is not only a really great photographer, but he is an even better editor. So he'll like take the pictures that look bad and he'll just delete them. I think we should all the Midtowners should probably just like send Jamie a $20 every once in a while just to sort of like bribe him and make sure that those photos never see the light of day. But I was delighted to sit down with Jamie Harmon. So this interview is part one of two interviews with Jamie. It was recorded on February 10th, 2022. Enjoy the interview. What about for you? Is there an early memory for you in terms of art?
That I don't think I've ever thought about it like that for sure. And yes, there is an early memory that I don't always think about when people say childhood. They're like, "Where were you born?" I think about this. I think about this ridiculous thought of I must have been 4 years old. Now I have earlier memories, but the memory that I can visualize, that I can see it, I could have been 3. It's hard to know. I lived in Greenville, Mississippi, and someone gave me a pair of vampire teeth, which is probably not something you give to a child that young, but it was the 70s. Um, and I lost them, and I was remember looking for them forever because they were like a prized possession. And I was walking over I was messing around the living room. It was summer probably, or maybe either way, the light was coming through the window. There were sheer curtains, and I saw something through the sheer curtains on the window ledge. And just I remember the excitement that I found my vampire teeth. And I ran up, and I remember the visual walking up, believing it, through the curtain back. And it was a biscuit that I had laid there days earlier. It's just a biscuit. So I was completely let down, but the visual of how I was fooled by that because of the diffusion of the curtain and what that shape looked like to me. And I believed it with everything that it was, those vampire teeth. And it was a biscuit. And then I remember thinking, was it still good? It wasn't. He tapped it. I probably left it there because I was 3. But that visual is always there, those curtains and the light coming through and what it looked like diffused. So like that, to me in my mind, it's like that was a photograph that I would have taken but can't take. And also remember walking down the street and on rainy days in the rain, when the ditches would fill up with water, the small little ditches in front of the houses that your driveway would go over, and toys from other children would have washed down and get stuck near the drain where sticks would stop, and they would be like this toy called the Weeble Wobbles, which I don't, they definitely can't be around anymore.
No.
But the Weeble Wobbles and other little Fisher Price type of toys all drowning in this water, and I just remember standing there looking at that. So stuff like that are the earliest visual memories, and I could probably name 5 others from that year of like a yellow vinyl beanbag that we had that I took it in the backyard and unzipped it to see what was in it. And turns out it was tiny little white, teeny weeny, smaller than BB's styrofoam balls. And I dumped it in the backyard in the grass. And I remember looking at all those little white dots in the blades of grass. And then the next memory is my poor mother in the backyard, me in the house looking out that window. I'm sorry. Looking out the window with the vacuum in the backyard, vacuuming the grass. So, like, all of those little movie stills were amazing, right? And almost to the point where after talking about it, I really want to recreate that.
Definitely. So now thinking about that, okay, so you're there in Greenville, and both your parents are there, and then I can't remember. Do you have siblings?
I have a brother that's 18 months younger.
Okay, and then was art a thing that was talked about in the house? Was it a thing that was there? Was there art?
No. There were pictures of Jesus. It's the South. Art was never talked about in a way like that. Music that my parents listened to was what was on the radio. And we had, a console record with 8 tracks, and they did have music. And I remember, seeing like Meatloaf, and I was more interested in, at that young age for sure, the album covers, like Queen and Meatloaf, and the Queen robot holding the dead bodies. Oh, that was just, I was stuck with that.
Now, so this is one of the things that I love about how vinyl is making a comeback. And so this is something that I talk with my students about a lot, which is like how important those album covers were to people of my generation in particular. Because really, a lot of the people that I talked to for this project, they'll say the exact same thing you did. No, there was no art there in the house, but I remember sitting there and I remember looking at these particular album covers and how influential those were. And so you mentioned the Queen one and the Meatloaf one. Were there others in particular? And then was there a common thread that would go through those album covers? Like, was there always kind of a sexy lady in there, or was there always like a robot or explosions or what?
No, funny enough, I don't really recall sex being a part of it, of the music that I would see, or that I, because it would either be an uncle. It wasn't probably till I was 8 years old that I was buying records with, I don't know, not my money, of course, but if we were at Walmart, they sold records, and so I was 8. I bought Kiss records, so it was Kiss.
Which ones?
Oh well. Detroit Rock City, and Double Platinum was all silver. Yes. That was a favorite, and it wasn't. And that was interesting that you bring it up too. When you think about, obviously everybody, not obviously, a lot of people saw art in those record covers because that's what they were, and they had to put a lot of thought into that. And Double Platinum was embossed silver. And it didn't have, it had embossments, but it was a different way. It was like, oh, you can do a record. You don't have to have a photograph or a painting. It looks like this. It's shiny. I wanted it because it was shiny. Oh, there's a ton of them. Every single one of them, I wound up buying every one of them. So yeah, that was probably the introduction to art. Was not in an art theme, but just visually. Like, this is interesting. I like looking at it. Look at all the stuff. Bat Out of Hell was crazy looking. The Meatloaf album. And then, of course, Kiss was just because they wore makeup and it was wild looking and they made movies and all that stuff.
And they were so dangerous. Like they for me anyway, because
they were
like
a demon.
Yeah, exactly. Fire. Yeah, there was like a demon, and there was like some, satanic stuff because Kiss was knights in Satan's service or whatever it was, and
the lore that had started. Yeah, the lies. Yeah,
and especially down there in Mississippi, I imagine that kind of being a thing. Now, what about for you with your friends that you were hanging around with? Was art a part of any of that?
Well, we moved every year until I was in high school. So I didn't make friends except for people I would meet around the neighborhood. But there weren't. So, I was born in Greenville, Mississippi. And before I started school, we moved to South Haven, like Whitehaven. And then I went to first kindergarten there. And then we moved again, and I went to first grade at another school. And then we moved to Helena, Arkansas, and I went to second grade and some of third grade. And then we moved to like Tupelo and Clarksdale and Forest City and Wynn and all these towns and then we moved to Memphis by the time I was in high school. So
now what was going on? What was...
My father worked for Kroger, and since he was in high school, and, it was, hey, if you want to be front end manager, you have to go to Helena. If you want to be the assistant manager, eventually you work your way up the ladder, and it's all the carrot of go to the next town. And which was fine with me because it was just a new place to explore. And my brother and I, boy, I feel like we were 18 months apart, but it felt like years and years. We were quite different from one another, so we didn't really hang a lot that I can recall. We didn't have the same friends, so it was quite different. But yeah, so we moved a lot, and in each town, it was really video games happened, and then the art was on video games. The Atari, anything visual like that was new. That's where it would come into the house. The paintings on the wall at our house or the pictures, they moved with us every year. It was never changed, and it was the stuff that would have been, owls on in a tree, or like a picture of Jesus, a picture of Paris that you see at every thrift store now, that kind of stuff. So they weren't really they blended into the home. They weren't anything that stood out.
Now, one of the things that you said when you were talking about moving was exploring, and I know a lot of kids that moved around a lot, and some of them, for them, it was more of a nomadic thing, and they didn't necessarily have that sense of exploration. What do you think, like when you say you would explore, like for me, of course, 2024 Hamlet knows 2024 Jamie, who goes around and like that's your jam. And so, how was exploration? What form did it take in Little Jamie?
Same thing. It was, I'm, now it's the thing to say people are Generation X doesn't care. They don't care about anything. They were left alone. I was like trusted to see you later be home when the sun goes down. And I would get on railroad tracks and walk 5 miles. I would get in a ditch and see what was in the ditch and walk until I left the neighborhood. The ditches and the railroad tracks, things like that, you couldn't get lost because it's not like you're in the woods. You just turn around. It goes back to where you started, you know? So that's what I would do. I would say, well, I'm going to take this ditch until I get tired, and then I'll turn around. And
Now,
there were forests and woods and stuff like that, but it was hard to get lost in a small town.
now would you be by yourself?
Usually,
Huh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And then, I mean, for me, such a big part of my brain as a kid was fear. And so, was there a sense of fear at all? You know, you weren't going to end up on a milk carton or
Only from dogs.
Yeah.
Only from dogs. Dogs were the fear, but mainly when you were on your bike. They just love to chase a bike. If you weren't on a bike, you were usually left alone by dogs. But man, they hate bikes. So there was always that part of town, in every town, where you knew there was a dog that was going to chase you. And if you didn't start getting some speed, they were going to get ahead of you. And then you could crash, Now, that was the only fear. But I was never attacked by a dog, and I never had that issue with humans. I only met great, interesting people. I mean, when I was in fourth grade, I walked by a house that had a bunch of cages with quail and rabbits in them. So I was drawn to that. Of course, nowadays we'd say, don't, your kid, fourth grader, going up talking to a stranger. And I made friends with this older couple, and they were great. And they gave me a cage and gave me a rabbit, and I had that rabbit at my house. Just made friends with them, and then they stopped by my house over Christmas and gave me a Christmas gift. I didn't know they would do that, and that was in Wynne, Arkansas, I think. It was a really small town, so and then when eventually bikes, I'd ride my bike up and just do that stuff. But it was usually in the ditches and on the railroad tracks and stuff like that. But all of that, yeah, that was my thing. I could have done that. I still do that, but these days it does seem a little weirder if you're not weird, but I guess I'm mostly driving to places and then I'll walk around. You don't leave. I'm not stuck in my neighborhood.
Right. Now, when you were a kid, what sorts of, like you were saying, you were talking about the family with the quails. What were some other things? Was it I would imagine that some kids it would be a thing to meet other kids, but it sounds like for you it was really just a need to see and to experience, and almost like a young explorer.
I didn't mind being alone, and since I was always the new person in a town every year, sometimes two schools in one year, it didn't bother me. It didn't make me nervous. I didn't like it to start school in the middle of a year and say, hey, this is the new student, and then everybody looks at you and then they give you a seat and you don't know anybody there. So I was fine. I felt that uneasiness at school. I felt once school was out, I felt like the weight was lifted and I am free and I'm happy to not have to talk to these people. So it didn't bother me. I'm not antisocial, but I'm perfectly fine not being around people. But if I'm around people, that's fine too. But yes, it was definitely more. It didn't bother me to talk to people that I didn't know. Especially if they had something interesting, I didn't have a problem with knocking on the door and saying, "Hey, what are those in that cage?" Because I didn't know what a quail was. I learned by that guy telling me, and then I learned. I think there's a police officer that lived across the street from us, and he wound up killing the rabbit, the dog. He had a German Shepherd, and I think that's how that rabbit finally ended. Was the dog got into the cage, but that was a lesson too. All those were wonderful lessons. It's a bad lesson for the rabbit, but um, you know.
Right. Now, and so thinking about that though, I mean, I know you mostly as a person who also takes pictures. When did that enter your world?
My Aunt Sherry, so my mother is a twin, and they are Geraldine and Sherilyn Weed. So my Aunt Sherry, Jerry and Sherry for short, my Aunt Sherry was like another mother to me. And when we moved, of course, she didn't live where we lived, but she went to visit somebody in Germany, I think when I was 10 or so, and brought me back a camera, a viewfinder or rangefinder Electro 35 Yashica. And my mother had started working for Walmart, so she could get, film was cheap anyway, but she could get it processed there for really cheap, because they did film back then. You dropped off your film at Walmart, or you could, and then they would, it'd take a week, and then it would show back up. So I started taking pictures of the ditches and the woods and the railroad tracks and all the stuff that I was doing. I just started carrying the camera with me and taking pictures of it, probably when I was about, I don't know, between 10 and 11 or 12. And then she would process it, but I didn't think, because I was just taking pictures, I didn't really understand the system. So I didn't really save the negatives, because the negatives weren't the thing I wanted. I wanted the prints. I didn't know that the prints were made from the negatives. Another lesson learned, that usually they were stuck in the envelope, but I have no idea what happened to those. I still have some of the pictures, but definitely no negatives from then. And then I just kept learning the hard way over time.
Now thinking about the taking of the pictures, so I think a lot of kids would have a camera, and it would be a thing that it would be a particular occasion, and they would pull the camera out. But it sounds like you had the camera and you were sort of walking around with it, and it was like a partner on these excursions.
A machete and a camera.
Right.
Because you got to have the machete to cut through the thickets sometimes. Plus, when you're that age, you're like, machete just cool to have.
Machete is pretty cool.
Had a hatchet too, and I would practice throwing the hatchet into trees. Like machete and a hatchet. I probably had a Rambo knife.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know when that showed up, but
yes.
Oh yeah, I was not into hunting, but it was more. Yeah, it was totally exploring. It was just like. Plus, but it was just like. What if a dog does come up or whatever? I got a knife.
Right.
Yeah, but yes, the camera just became that thing that was always with me, not to take pictures of special occasions, the opposite, of everything else.
Now, where do you think that came from? That isn't I mean, I'm not saying you're not normal, but I'm saying that's not a typical impulse. Do you wonder where that maybe came from in terms of your world, your influence?
Well, I think about that with my own kids, how I feel lucky to something came into my life that struck me and fit and happens to be useful in the capitalist world we live in. It took me a very long time to figure out how to, capitalize or monetize what I could keep doing for a living, because it wasn't that way for a long time. It was just, I'm still going to do this, and I'm going to have a job. I'm almost like, well, I'm an actor, so I wait tables, that kind of thing. And before digital age, it was even more difficult, of course, to figure out how to make a living with that, because if you're not really good at it, you can't shoot a wedding with film if you don't know what you're doing, because then it's all over and it didn't work out. So it took a while to learn before pre-internet and all that kind of information. Like I said, I learned the hard way. But I started so early, by the time I was 18, I knew what I was doing. So at that point, I suppose, yes, I had to jump on everything. So by the time I was 20, I was processing color and printing color by hand. So by just me getting the chemicals and doing it with equipment, with the old whatever. So that most people were doing black and white, and they had big machines to do color. And I couldn't do it for like 1 hour photo type of thing, but I could do my own stuff. So I was moved into color really early. I've lost track of the question that you asked about why do you think I did that? I think I was lucky to be given that camera and it worked with me. If no one would have given me a camera, I I probably never would have known because I didn't know. I wasn't drawn to like I want a camera. She gave me a camera and I was like, well, what's this thing? How does it work? And my mom said, well, you shoot some film and I can have it processed. And then when I did it, I was like, oh, it's almost like if somebody gives you a tool, or I'm trying to think of a good metaphor for it, but you're not going to even think about changing the tires on your car if you don't have any tools to take the lug nuts off. But once you're given the tool and said, oh, you can take the lug nuts off and then your tire comes off, then you might think, oh, well, maybe I'll get bigger tires. Or if I have a flat, I don't have to call anybody. It was kind of like that, where it's like, oh, this thing does this. Now I could document what I find, because some things I'm not grabbing things and bringing them back to the house. If I'm exploring, it really wasn't about collecting. It was just about being alone and enjoying the walk. You know, but inevitably, I would be like, oh well, I remember starting a little fire underneath a concrete tunnel that went under railroad tracks. So the railroad track tunnels were all concrete, and so I knew it was safe to build a fire in there as a kid all alone because it's not the forest. I'm not going to burn anything down. Water flows through here and it's concrete. So I started this fire and all the smoke rose and started filling up the tunnel. Well, the smoke hit the ceiling, and that's where a bunch of spiders lived. They did not like the smoke, so they all started paratrooping down. And that's when I was like, that's a pretty good freak out memory.
Right.
Of like, get the hell out.
Now, thinking about that though, so I mean, what was the response like from your family with these photos? Like, I mean, you were kind of talking about the ease of it, and so I could see in some ways where it would just be like, oh, this is easy enough, we can do it sort of affordably, and Jamie's happy and whatever. But would they look at them as well? Would they talk with you about them? Was there?
No, we never discussed anything like that. We had my parents were great. I'm lucky and privileged to have had parents that, they both worked every day. Like we were definitely away from each other every day. Like in America, you're stuck to go to school for 8 hours. Your parents might work 8 to 12 hours. My dad worked easily 10 hours a day, but we'd all see each other at the end of the day, and we would eat dinner in front of with TV trays, watching game shows. So that's how we spent our time together. There was no. We didn't have to. I don't remember being asked, "How was your day?" We just all knew our day was our day. If something crazy happened, maybe we talked about it, but otherwise, we just talked about what was happening on the game show or what was maybe coming up. It's hard to remember those details, but we didn't discuss anything abstract, and I definitely wasn't encouraged to do anything except for be happy. That was really my mother's main thing, which I wouldn't say I don't tell my kids, all I want you to do is be happy. I mean, I do, but I also understand that nobody's happy all the time. It's just not the way of life. But my parents didn't go to college, and they didn't travel a lot. Not that you have to do those things, but traveling and being around a lot of different people can teach you more. I don't even know if it's teaching you. It just opens you up to things that you sometimes wish you didn't know. Like that ignorance is bliss type of thing. It's like, man, it would be nice to be ignorant of certain things. I know it's not good for the community at large, but it saves a lot of your own strife and being up at 3 a.m. worrying about things because you don't know to worry. So I think they lived in that world, and So I didn't know any different besides just keep exploring and keep trying things and do things that you think are interesting. But I guess, having friends and not having a bunch of people I would hang around. It's almost like if you didn't, these days, if kids didn't have a phone, then they would do other things. They would have to. If there was no phone, they would, and there was no TV with a million channels on demand. If you had to watch your TV show that you liked when it came on Thursday at 8, and you didn't have a phone or the internet, you're going to walk the ditches or learn to play the guitar or whatever. So all that it's a different time frame. So even if my child, I was trying to think about, like, I want to give them things and make them do things and hope they get out of their friend groups and try something else, because it might be the thing. It might be their camera. It might be their guitar. Who knows? That gives them a purpose to always be able to have something to do that's interesting to them, which I don't know how that works. I really don't. I mean, I know people. I think what seems like what you were trying to get at is like, what is the thing that did you know? And it's like, no, it's luck, and and it's difficult to know which brain is going to take to a certain piece of machinery or technology, or just abstractly know how to sculpt something, because I mean, obsession is a good thing for like, I'm obsessed with documenting things. Well, that's an obsession that is not too damaging to me. Where if I was obsessed with washing my hands, that's probably going to be damaging,
Right.
you know? But and but even if you have like a natural ability to sculpt something, if you work at it more, you're going to be way ahead of everybody else. So if you maybe have a certain way of thinking, like these days, I think we think the people that are everybody's on a spectrum. So there's a place for anybody to fit in the working world these days where there weren't back then. So my obsession with what I was doing wasn't really useful in the 80s necessarily, but the 90s it was, and it still is today.
Well, I mean, thinking about that, so a lot of the people that I've talked to for this project, a lot of their drive comes from that stuff that I was asking about, which is like encouragement and reward and things like that. Like, oh, my parents recognize that I really like making art or whatever, and so they gave me like a bunch of sketchbooks, and they signed me up for a bunch of classes and stuff. And so one thing for sure that I'm interested in that your story sort of deviates from this path, is how you are building that connection between your current day Jamie wanting to document things and the little Jamie with the camera. And so, like, I know you couldn't have been like, well, this is my job at 11 years old, I'm documenting everything, but like, what, that must have been there. And if it was, I wonder what shape it took.
Before I forget it all, yes, I think a few things. Dyslexia. I've never gone to a doctor and they said, you have dyslexia. It's quite obvious to me that that's what I have. And everybody has degrees of that. Even if you have dyslexia, you have different degrees on a spectrum of that, right? And it is very difficult for me to read anything or focus or have anything, directions. Oh man, IKEA furniture, I can do it, but I have to be alone, for like hours to make sure I don't have to backtrack. But so my life is very visual because of that. So I think that's one thing. I'm going to be drawn to the things that seem to fit my brain. And so art was definitely that. I was not encouraged, or even, I don't ever remember my parents saying, "Dude, you're really good at that," because I think that was too abstract too. So let me see if I can get my thoughts straight. So that, a very visual life, because academia and school did not fit, which I think we all know is very common these days, and only a few people actually fit in that world, and everyone is forced to learn that way. And in my opinion, just so we can be workers, right? And I think a lot of people might even know that, even though that's They're okay with it. You're like, yeah, I'm supposed to be a worker. Um, Oppositional reflex. I think that can work just as well as encouragement. So, just someone to tell you you can't do that could be the same fuel to just say, watch me, you know? So, it's not that my parents said you can't do that, but my dad definitely, kind of in a joking way, but he never said it with like real malicious, like, I'm sick of you wasting your time. But I definitely heard this phrase until I was probably 22. When are you going to get a real job? You know, that kind of attitude. And it's like, so I guess it was more of, instead of needing encouragement, I was more reacting to, oh, well, fuck you. I'm going to do what I want. You know, try to tell me I have to do this. And I will figure out a better way to not do that. Right. If I don't want to work, like my dad got me a job working at Kroger, of course, because that's where he worked. And I did that. I sat groceries for 2 weeks, and I was like, yeah, I don't want to mop the front end of anything ever again. So that was enough to say, all right, I get it. I can't sit at home and do what I want to do. I wasn't just sitting at home anyway, but I'm not, in your mind, I need to have a job at this point in my life, like 17 or something, right? So I'll find it on my terms. You know, I will get a job, but it's not going to be the job you think it should be. So that's probably what led me, because eventually I did wind up taking pictures of tourists that ride the riverboats, as you know, from an exhibit. I think that exhibit we did. Yeah. And that was like 1989. I was 19. I started doing that. So I would wind up taking, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of photographs a week with a manual Pentax K1000 camera, and the meter would always be dead because the batteries would die. We used them so much. So I just got used to knowing what to set the camera at, depending on if the sun was out, if it's cloudy, if it's between sun, you know, you start shooting a boat for an hour at sunset, it's bright, and then by the time you're finished, it's getting dark. So you have to constantly change your settings throughout. And then we would go process and print the film by hand, and then run, not by hand, I say by hand, but we had old machines that were very rudimentary, and they required you to manually fiddle with them the entire time you were printing. So, and then we would take them back and sell them to the people. We have to get them done in an hour. So it was quite a rush. So doing that so much just made the camera an extension. Eventually it just became, I don't have to think about it. If I have an idea, I know whether I can do it or not. Like, it's almost like being the architect and the engineer. You know, the architect may have some engineering understanding, but they could design something, and the engineer could say that's not physically possible. You know, and the engineer may want to just make things simple, and the architect wants to make it complicated. I'm oversimplifying it, of course, but right. It's kind of the idea of like, oh, well, when you get so second nature at your craft, whether, no matter what it is, whatever your thing is, it's like working with, you know, auto mechanic. You're going to be so efficient at it that it's going to be easier for you to get through the day. So that's, you know, and then it was another tool in my toolbox. I had access to machines. Like, even when I wasn't at work, I could endear myself to the person that managed it to let me in there afterwards. You know, like, can I come in can I stay late and keep processing and printing my own stuff? So that gave me access to that, which meant, oh, now I can do things that I couldn't do last week because I have access to this equipment that I didn't have before. So that was kind of like the beginning of that, you know, which really, really catapulted me into using a camera even more obsessively.
Now, thinking about that, so at that time, at 19, you were done with high school?
Yeah.
And then, I can't remember, I know that you had
I went to Memphis College of Art and then dropped out because it was just too It was another school. Even though it was MCA,
Right.
it was still another school.
Now, what was it? Was it the parents who were like, "It's time for college"? Like, was it one of those things, or what? Did you at some point think, "Yeah, this sounds like the thing. Let's go to college"?
Well, they, back when you were in high school, they had recruiters that would come to your school, and MCA, all those art schools and any school, but art school especially, I think can target. They have a broad targeting system, and they make you feel like you've got something special. And I did other things. I mean, I was painting and drawing and trying all that other stuff out. I just didn't have the patience for it, I don't think. But, they'd say, oh, you could probably get a scholarship with this portfolio. They say stuff like that, and the scholarship is like negligible compared to what they cost. And so I was like, I want to go here. This seems like a place I would fit. And then after the first semester, it was like I didn't fit there. It was a lot of, I would say, the people that I remember. I liked the teachers, and Amy Carter was there. She was in my 2D class at the time. Jimmy Carter's daughter started school there at that same year I started. Mm-hmm. So there was a bunch of stuff going on about that. So it seemed like an exciting place. But most of the people at that time, and this is 1988, the world was different. You had to be an artist. You couldn't be a graphic designer. That was different. That's a sellout. And MCA was definitely, you're an artist or get the hell out. You're a poser or whatever you wanted to call it. And everybody was a brooding, trying to be so different that it was a mass of nonconformity. So it's like, now you're just like a whole bunch of everybody else out there. You're just doing it with Halloween costumes on at the time. And this was, it was like a drastic difference.
Now, so you made this change from, so where were you in high school? Were you here in Memphis or
Bartlett.
were you in Bartlett? Okay.
Yeah.
And then you decided, so we're not even going to talk about Bartlett. I love that. I love how as you say Bartlett, you are shaking your head back and forth. And so I'm not even going to ask any questions about Bartlett. So then you ended up going to MCA, and you were only there for a brief time. And you were saying that you remembered some of the teachers, but like part of my brain is thinking, some of this stuff that you were talking about before with taking pictures and having it be this thing that you're really excited about. And then going to this school, was it one of those things where you even got to the place where you were taking pictures at school, or was it just like the intro 2D design garbage that...
No, 2D design was great. I learned a lot, but it was still probably that oppositional reflex thing, of like, even then I didn't feel like... it's not that I felt that I had to fit in anywhere, but everybody wants to fit in somehow. Mm-hmm. But once you're there, I'm like, oh, this isn't it either. Mm. And... it's like I didn't feel that I had to do something and follow through with it. That I think that's a myth of like, you don't start something unless you're going to finish it. I'm like, no, I'm going to stop doing it, right. And I'm going to do something else. Why should I waste my time 4 years at a school that I know immediately I don't like? And even if I'm wrong, and some people would say, well, give it time. Like, I get that. There's certain things that I've done, that over time I realized that was okay. But anyway, that's how it goes. That's why I was too young to be doing that at 18. I don't think you should go straight to college right out of high school. I think you should go to work and realize you don't want to do that. But I learned a lot in 2D design. I learned a lot in the photography class was great. I definitely learned more.
Now, who was teaching that?
Oh,
pop quiz. Who's that?
I don't remember.
That's fine.
I do not remember.
Okay.
All I remember is thinking, when do I have access outside of class? I don't want to be in here with all these people. I want to come later when everybody's gone and have it to myself and not have to talk to these people. Not that they were bad people, but it was just distracting. So that's what I did mostly. I just fulfilled the obligations of the class, and then I used the dark room. And this was before I worked at downtown, so I didn't have access to any other stuff. So that was great. I spent a lot of time in the dark room, but after 3 months of that, I was like, man, I feel like I've gotten all I needed to know about black and white printing when it comes to I learned how to do everything proficiently, and black and white is really simple. So unless you are trying to print like Ansel Adams did and have 50 different zones on a photo, that need to be dodged and burned and all that stuff. But that also doesn't lend itself to my impatience of about the print. It's more like I'm looking for the exposure instead of the print. But anyway, so that's what I did, and then I dropped out, and then I just worked and did whatever, just took pictures of stuff for fun. And I wanted to be like, I wanted to have a gallery and be a part of that and go into the art world and have exhibits and shows and kind of stuff. So there were little shops around that I would probably put photographs in, that would let you put something in a hallway, the normal typical stuff that an artist might do and try to just get seen. And because that's just all I knew the way to do it.
Now, just out of curiosity, so before you hanging out with the weebles and the ditches and taking the pictures of the everyday things, I mean, one of the things that I think about you so much as a person who takes photographs is how you documented so much of such a broad section of the city. When was it that you started thinking about things? I mean, obviously you're taking pictures of people on riverboats, but like when you're 19 and you're of an age where you start to see more things, when was it that you started, or what kind of pictures were you taking when you were 19?
I think I never actually sought out a specific theme in a way. It was like, oh, if I go on a walk, I'm going to bring my camera because you never know what you're going to see. Oh, my friend's band, my brother's friend's band is playing the Antenna in 1989 at Halloween. And I thought, oh, well, I don't really go hang out at the Antenna much, but Halloween might be interesting. So I shot that, and then it would be go on a road trip. Or at some point, I sold everything, bought an old Volkswagen bus, and just drove around the country, went as far as Nova Scotia, just sleeping in the van, 1989, and photographed stuff all along the way, So I have all those negatives. Now, they're less interesting to me now because at 19, there was too much to take in, and I definitely wasn't open enough to just walk up to everybody and start talking to them, and what I should have done is, like, coming out of Ontario, the border people in America thought for sure I had drugs, but I didn't drink. I didn't smoke. I never did any drugs. They ripped my car apart, and if I was scared, thinking they're going to plant something bad's going to happen. But I should have been photographing them rip it apart, and I would now. But I was too young and timid back then to do it, So there are things like that I remember, but I didn't photograph. Anyway, so that was a.
No, wait, hang on. All right, so you you at 19 got a VW bus and then drove to Nova Scotia
Through, like the Ozarks and
Yeah.
St. Louis.
Yeah.
Took the longest route, Niagara Falls, all the way down the East Coast.
Now, how did you do this? And then also thinking about that not being a totally typical thing for a 19-year-old to do, what was your impulse, and then what was going on then?
Dropped out of school.
Right.
Didn't have any, it was just the adventure of it. And I think I had $1,200. Once I sold everything I could possibly sell besides my camera, that was, I had $1,200. And back then, the gas was like 90 cents a gallon. Although I got into Canada through Detroit, and then gas was 50 cents a liter. So it wound up being almost $2 a gallon. And of course, I was like, 50 cents, that's cheap. Because I didn't know. I didn't know. Maybe, is it a liter? Yeah, I was like, I didn't realize what it, and then I was halfway to Niagara Falls, and I realized, shit, I cannot travel through Canada. I got to get back into America. And so I went over back in at Niagara Falls and then went to Quebec City, and I just pop in and out. But anyway, I don't know. It was just a matter of like, let's see how long I can live in the van off $1,200.
But that was your first time. I mean, because earlier
Yeah.
you were kind of talking about doing a lot of 1-year stints, mostly in the South. And so, what was that experience like in terms of going up through those areas? Did you?
Scary. Definitely cried myself to sleep a few times to get past the homesickness and the fear and like what am I doing? I never really questioned what am I doing, but at the end of a day when there's nothing to look at and you've got to find a place to park the van and sleep, van life wasn't invented, as the thing that we know it as now. So there wasn't Walmart parking lots to park in and feel safe. And I was too young and stupid to know where was safe. I slept underneath a damn bridge in St. Louis, downtown St. Louis. I don't even remember the bridge, but I just said, this is secluded. The cops aren't going to mess with me. I wasn't thinking about teenagers that might show up to party or just anybody, right. And nobody messed with me, but, and then eventually it would be like I smartened up and I was like, oh, I could just park in a hotel parking lot. They just think I'm another car. And if they don't, I'll leave, So that wound up, if it wasn't a campground, I mean, you could go to campgrounds as well, and then they had showers, stuff like that. But the camper was super comfortable. So every once in a while I would get a cheap motel just to be like, I'll take a shower and have a place to do something. And I would wind up sleeping in the van in the parking lot then, just because it was more comfortable than the bed. That's what you get used to. And you're young, your body doesn't hurt like it does now.
Now, again, thinking about the parents, your folks were just like, all right, Jamie, we'll see ya.
My mother was scared to death. Because you couldn't just call. She didn't know where I was. I'd have to call her collect from a payphone periodically and say, I'm alive, it's fine. And yeah, she was, I drove that damn thing through New York City, like Times Square in 1989. That was crazy.
Now, so then you decide to come back from this.
Money ran out. You got to come home.
This walkabout, and so then you come back to town, and this is when you start doing the photography for the riverboats.
Yeah, shortly after that. I think I started doing that. I did it for like 3 months in 1988 at the river. It's kind of hard to remember. There was a point where I worked for the riverboat guy. He was Scottish. He was from Scotland, wasn't a U.S. citizen. He had done photos on cruise ships over there, so he wound up getting a contract with the Memphis Queen Line riverboats to do their photos. So he would hire a manager, and he hired this guy who was a complete idiot. And I worked for a few months, and then I was like, that guy's an idiot. And then I quit, but I had met Bill, the owner, and he and I got along fine, and he realized that he needed me to be the manager, not that guy. That guy he fired, and then he called me, and I had just gotten back from that trip, and he said, hey, and I said, look, I can't work Randy. If Randy's running it, I can't do it. He's too ridiculous. And he said, no, I need you to run it. And I'm like, okay, I'll do that. And so I did that, and then a year after, and then I would quit every year, just because it was like, I'm sick of doing this. It's no hard feelings. I'm out of here. And they also slowed down in the winters because they don't run boats in the winter. So the winters were like, it was almost like when you're a teacher, you have summers off. Well, when you work at the riverboats, you have winters off. And that's fine with me. So I did it again. And then he said, look, I want you to buy the business. I will finance it. Here's how much it makes. Here's what it is. I know you can do it. So I trust that you can pay me because I know you can do it.
Now, how old were you at this time?
At that point, I was probably 20.
Okay.
Because I'd done it a year, and then he was sick of dealing with it so far away. And it wasn't something that he could really sell to anyone because it only existed if someone could do it because it was difficult. You had to make tourists let you take their picture and then try to sell it to them when they got off the boat. There was no guarantee they were going to buy anything. But if you were good at the printing and you could get the photos to look good, then they were more likely that they would buy them because back then it was manual cameras, printing by hand. You've got to get the color on the dials manually. Everything was manual, so it was a pain in the ass. But so that's what I did, and I paid it, and I think I bought that, he said $100,000 over 5 years. So I paid him like $25,000 a year. And then eventually my dad, who always told me to get a real job, he wound up working with me at the riverboats. And then I left town and he took over the business. So that was kind of a funny irony.
That is funny. So now, how long did you run it?
Um, I guess I worked there from 1989 until 1998. So 10 years
Wow.
on and off because summers and, I mean, winters were closed. And sometimes I quit, before I took it over from me. And then when I took it over, and it's all cash back then too. I mean, but it definitely made me go, okay, I didn't know how to manage money. So I just spent it on everything. And then I'd run credit cards up in the winter and then pay them off in the summer because I had to get through the winter.
Now, what were you taking pictures of on your own outside of that during this time?
Yeah, so let me try to think because I was at the riverboats a lot and it was super interesting. So they would have it's a subculture down there, or it used to be for sure. So one year they had hired all the deckhands were from halfway houses because they get subsidized by the government. So I get to hang out with ex-cons all day and hear their stories about prison and the slang coming out of prison. I remember hearing the word crunk way before anybody else heard it because it was a prison term, and all these things. And then I started audio recording. I bought little an audio recorder. I don't remember what year it was, late 90s. And I would have the little lapel microphone on my belt in my belt loop, and I would just basically interview and secretly record the deckhands every day. I still have all those recordings. I don't think I've ever listened to them because I always tell myself I'm waiting until I break my leg and I can't do anything, and then I'll go do the thing by sitting down. But there was a good 10 years where I recorded people just as obsessively as I took the pictures. So I have photographs of those deckhands, of the riverboats. Just the machinery and the boats were interesting. So it took me years to get tired of that.
Now, just to go back to that, so you were talking again about taking the pictures, and so at this point you've got some pretty good solid understanding of yourself. And so what do you think it was about taking pictures that what was the itch that it scratched?
Eventually, I think it was a way to connect with people on an innocent level. And maybe innocent's not the word, but I like making people feel good about themselves. So eventually it was, I can give you this picture I took of you for free. It's just a gift. You did something cool. You caught that fish, because there would be people that would fish on the bank, and they'd catch this fish and they'd be all excited. And I'd say, I'd run off the dock and I'd be like, let me get a picture of you with your fish. And then the next day they'd be back to fish and I'd give them their pictures, and they would be super excited about it. Well, there wasn't the internet or social media. You didn't get likes. Nobody knew I was doing it. But it was just a connection with that person I may never see that person. I mean, these were the people on the so we'd be loading the riverboats and working down there, and there would be people fishing off the banks. And many of the people fishing would have buckets. They'd fill the buckets up with fish. And I've talked to many of them over the course of 10, 15 years. They constantly were the same people doing it. And they would go back to their neighborhoods and sell the fish to their neighbors. That's how they made a living, because their neighbors may be in these redlined areas that had no grocery stores. They didn't drive. They couldn't get anywhere, and they would eat these carp out of the river, if the catfish, if he was lucky. And I just learned about a whole ecosystem that happens that I never knew about. It's like, oh, I wouldn't eat those fish, but if I was starving, I would eat those fish. Mm-hmm. And that's that, so, and then every time I saw him, I knew what he was doing. Nobody else bothered to ask.
So it wasn't like in my head, I think about that great scene from 1 Hour Photo. Did you ever see that with Robin Williams?
Yeah.
Horrible movie.
Yeah.
But there was this great scene where he goes into this empty room in his house and he clicks on these lights, and he has this wall from floor to ceiling filled with these pictures that he's kind of pilfered from other people's cameras,
Yeah.
And so it wasn't like you were taking these pictures, and and just having the pictures in your world was enough. You didn't need, but desired or wanted to also have that kind of innocent, like you were saying, connection, or a very simple gesture to give these to other people, and to also then become a part of their lives, but also a way for you to connect to these people in a way that wasn't really complicated.
I'm leaving out something that you've made me remember when it comes to like, why did I do this? So I don't really know. It wasn't like, okay. So it was very difficult to, go to, we didn't have a lot of art galleries in this town, still don't. And you couldn't just walk up to them and say, hey, I knew that. You couldn't just say, I want you to put my pictures up. You had to do it in a coffee shop or, and then it costs money. You got to frame those and nobody buys them. And then you're stuck storing them. And I learned that pretty quickly. Like, I don't want to do that. But when I was in high school, I had this friend named Freddie Ross, and he was a great illustrator type of drawing guy. And he went to MCA. We were there at the same time, but we never didn't hang out. It's almost like now I don't hang out with people much unless I'm working something or there's a project to do or something like that. I don't have a weekly card game with the boys, never have. But so we started mailing each other postcards in high school. And we would go to Target and drop off our film. You could drop it off in a little thing, and then a week later you'd come back, and they would be in the little packets in alphabetical order, and you go get your packets, and then you go pay for them up front. So you could look through other people's photos. They weren't locked up. But being a poor high school student, you could send 3 rolls of film, and you would have 3 packets. You could take all the negatives and put them in one packet, because I knew at that point I wanted the negatives. And then you go through the other photos and just get the photos you like and put all the photos you like in one packet and then just pay for that one packet. But you could also go through your friend Freddie Ross's pictures if you got there before him, if he did film too, and take some of his and then mail them to him as a postcard. But I think what we would do is we would take pictures and we would draw on them and do weird stuff like we're high school, make funny captions, fart or whatever, and then mail it where everybody could see it, and then it'd show up at your house. And so then I love that. And I did it for 30 years. And I still
you mean
do
with
it.
Freddie?
Well, Freddie passed away.
Yeah.
But I think here's what happened. It's like I'm fuck the system and having art exhibits and all that waste of time. I'm going to mail postcards to people that I want to see these pictures, whether they know me or not, whether it's a restaurant or a business or an office somebody works at or a company that I'm like, I really respect what they do, or I don't, whatever. It could be anybody, anywhere, anytime. It's pretty easy to get an address, even if you don't know their home address. I probably mailed them to galleries too, all over the place, just to be like, well, one day they may have seen these pictures coming in the mail for years and get interested. But anyway, it was all anonymous. You'd get a postcard, you wouldn't know where it came from. My name wasn't on it. Websites didn't exist. It was just postcards that I would mail out, and I would feel it was a sense of like, well, I don't know what that feeling is. Maybe you can help me figure out what that feeling is of like, you send out 100 postcards a month to 100 different places and people, and they're going to land in somebody's hand, and and in my mind, they were just like, boy, this is wild. What the hell is this? And that's what I did after high school. I continued to do that and just grow that for 30 something years. And I think in the past 10 years, it's dwindled because I got so busy with other projects. It was a lot of work. And then your life just gets more complicated. But if I could just do that and not have to work, if I could just do that one thing, that's what I would do. Because it lends itself to like, you explore the world.
Right. Well, I mean, I think one of the things that's real interesting about that is the exchange with you and Freddie. And so with you and Freddie, was there like a thing that would, like, obviously you knew one another, you were friendly.
I connected with Freddie. It was probably the first person I ever really connected with on an artistic level.
What do you think it was about Freddie?
He was weird. Yeah. Did you know Freddie?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, the Memphis Venn diagram overlap. We have like a parenthetical explanation how I know Freddie. Yeah, because, Freddie was at U of M with me, and
Oh, later. That's right.
yeah, and we were together in the ceramics room a lot, in the sculpture room a lot. And then later, my mom became good friends with Freddie because my mom took a bunch of art classes. And so one day, Freddie, of course, took a picture of him and my mom, a selfie, and then took it to Kinko's or something and enlarged it to 11 by 17 and mailed it to me, of course, mailing. And so then I put it in a sketchbook. And then after I put it in the sketchbook, I was teaching at the University of Memphis, and I had my sketchbook day. And I think I've told you the story before. And Diane McCullough saw it. And all my students are looking through stuff, whatever. And most of the students are just kind of flipping through stuff. And I hear this gasp. And I was like, Diane, what happened? What's the matter? And she goes, Freddie was my very first boyfriend ever. Now, Diane, I don't know what she was like in high school, but when I had her as a student, she was very straight-laced, very proper, and was kind of like a Germantown person that was dressed very well and was very clean and respectable. And so when she said that, it just like totally blew my mind. And so then that was another Venn diagram point of overlap with Freddie. And then he lived there on Watauga for a million years, and I would go and visit him at Watauga. And then every once in a while, he and I would go. He was the one that took me to Sultana, the Pakistani restaurant over there near the University of Memphis, before there were any Indian restaurants anywhere in town. Mm-hmm. And he took me there. And I remember one time we went to Wendy's, and we were in his big-ass van. And he goes around, and he's ordering in the takeout, or the drive-through lane, and he orders, and then he turns to me and says, watch this. And then he turns and says, and I want that to go. And then he pulls around, and I was just like, oh my God, Freddie is for sure. And I think my mom sort of dubbed him Weird Freddie. And so that's his like Native American name in our house is Weird Freddie. Yeah. And so that's one of the many Venn diagram overlaps. And then I would see Freddie at Comics and Collectibles when I came back to Memphis from grad school.
I would mail postcards to Comics and Collectibles.
To Freddie.
And he didn't know. I just started doing it, so one day they would go, hey, Freddie.
Yeah, here's a stack of postcards.
I would never know if it actually came through fruition, but I would do it anyway. And then one day I'd visit him. I could never get him to leave his house later. And, later in our relationship, I would come to Memphis and I'd go by and we'd visit. And
in that weird house.
He wouldn't go anywhere.
With all of the red books with black writing, and then the black books with red writing.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
I wonder what happened to all that stuff. I probably met him in 10th grade.
At Bartlett?
Yeah, Bartlett.
Oh, that's
and so
interesting.
the 3 years, we weren't like, friends. We did stuff all the weekend. We would just be like, hey, you want to go video this graveyard? Mm-hmm. Okay. You want to go, hey, I want to fill this guy's car up with paper and then video it when he gets out of school. And we did that one day, and we filmed through his big-ass van's tinted windows. So we had a VHS camera, and we videoed him, the guy coming back to his car, and it was full of paper, and he started throwing it all over the parking lot. And then somebody that worked at the gas station said, you can't do that, was shaking their finger at him, like, you're littering. Freddie's got that video, has to be somewhere in his collection, but
yeah, but I and then also Freddie, when the internet started, Freddie would print off weird shit and send it to me in the mail, like before there were Instagram messages or
Oh yeah,
Facebook
yeah.
messages or even probably email. But he would mail me these just like weird as shit
I
pictures.
love that guy.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, we had that in high school. That he was our. It was almost like our secret friendship. But I remember when he started dating Diane, and she was like that then too. She was pretty straight laced, and I remember thinking, "What's going on?"
yeah. Now, what was it about doing postcards? Because again, Jamie, that's not a normal thing. Why were you and Freddie? How did you know about this?
I don't think we heard about it. I think it was just. It's honestly difficult to remember. I want to say we were at the Riley Springs Mall. I seem to remember being at the phone. There was a phone booth of circular payphones outside of Camelot Music. I remember those because they were interesting looking, and you could stick your head in them and you couldn't hear them all. So I would stick my head in there to find silence. If you were on there, if you were hanging out on a Saturday night, it was just kind of funny. It was just one of those things that I remember doing. But I think I think we were always hanging around the music store there, and we thought about mailing a postcard to Camelot Music because it was just so absurd to think about mailing something to a business. Because it's almost like when you're young, you think your teachers live at the school. They don't have a life, and you see them out in the world, and you're like, what? So it was kind of that kind of weird thing about what if we mailed, because we're in here a lot. It'd be weird if we mailed a postcard to them. And I feel like what happened was we both mailed something to each other because of that thought, right? Of like, let's do that. Like, oh, I'm going to mail him a picture and he's not going to know. I mean, we both knew, and then it became just a thing. And then it just expanded. And obviously he kept mailing things to people, and he moved into collage and cut paper, and he was way more into the school, learning all the academic ways to do art. It fit him. He was great at the complicated doodle, and just obsessive about writing and filling books and collecting. Oh my God. And then modeling later, all that stuff. But yeah, we could talk about him for another 2 hours. But and then he moved in with Jeff Mitchell. I don't know if you knew Jeff Mitchell. I've been in contact with Jeff recently because he passed away at Jeff's house, like where they lived. And I've been trying to have coffee with Jeff. I haven't seen Jeff in 35 years. We weren't really friends, but it doesn't matter, But yeah, anyway, so Jeff, to predate that, just before I met Freddie, I had a Commodore 64 computer, and I had a website called the Black Market. And I didn't have a car, so I was in ninth grade, and I talked my parents into getting me my own phone line because I wanted a dedicated modem phone line so I could have a website. And it was all DOS. And when only one person could log on at a time. And it was all just whatever's on the keyboard. You could make the cursors different. I mean, the images, the characters, different colors, but you couldn't make a picture. And when you logged on, you could have a 300 baud modem or a 1200 baud modem. And when dial-up first started, it was 56,000. This was 1200, which is what I got upgraded to later. So, anyway, you'd log on and it would start scrolling over. The characters would start one line at a time. So if you drew an elaborate picture with asterisks, it would take forever. So anyway, but you could leave email. You could leave a message with somebody. Anybody that logged on could make a file of, what do you call it? They could log on. They could make an account, and then they get an email. And if you logged on the next day and somebody left you a message, it'd say, hey, you have a message, and you'd go check your message. And you could download video games. The reason I call it the black market is because I would take video games. I would go into the code and change the thought bubbles in the characters would have like, hey, you need to go to the castle and get the key. Well, I would change that to say, fuck off or something stupid. So anybody that downloaded a game from me could never really play the game because I just thought it was funny to go into the code and change all the thought bubbles. But the reason it was called the black market is because we all, when you're ninth grade, all the rumors of like the FBI is watching everybody and you're giving games away for free.
Right, war games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
as soon as I got a car, I sold all that stuff and never touched a computer until 10 years later.
Right. Okay, so let's see. All right, where were we? Let's see. Talking about taking pictures.
But the postcards definitely
Yes, the
led me to
postcards.
the thing. That was my outlet. So no matter what I was doing, all I needed was one image a month that I loved. So I guess my search, my daily, weekly, monthly goal was to take that image that I want to mail out. I might take thousands or hundreds of other ones, but there's one that I'm going to have to choose to send out to the 100 people on my list every month.
Now, was there a common thread?
No.
Okay.
Because it could be anything. It could be anywhere I wound up being, seeing, talking to, whatever.
Do you remember in your brain, was it just that it clicked, or was there
Narrative, a story. If it was, I would always write something on it too. So it would be either an abstract thought or something that, like the one that comes to mind is the guy who, I took a picture of a guy holding up this big gnarly fish. So he's holding it real close to the camera and he's in the background. The fish is in focus. He's blurry. It's very colorful. There's blood on the fish.
right?
And I remember him saying, that's a 12-worm fish, because it took him 12 worms. He lost his bait 11 times. And then in his mind, that was the fish that was stealing his bait, and he finally got it. It could have been 12 other different fish.
Right.
But so, in that one, I remember writing something along the line of, whatever his name, like so-and-so fishes every day at the bottom of the cobblestones. This is a 12-worm fish. No other explanation. Something along those lines. So that was one example, but it could have easily have been, I took a picture once of this guy who I came out of this, I was going into a crappy convenience store. There's an ashtray out front with cigarette butts in it. He comes out as I'm going in and he grabs a cigarette out of the sand ashtray, and it still has about an inch left on it. And then he lights it and walks off. And as he's walking off, he says something. And now I'm kind of drawing a blank. But it was like, take it where you can get it or whatever. And I said, let me take your picture. And then, this little stubby thing. And then, then it was like, oh, I'm going to tell the story of how this guy grabs. He just buys used cigarettes. He just only smokes used cigarettes. I don't know if that was the truth, but that's the way the narrative would happen. I needed it to be engaging. It wasn't just a picture that's like, oh, that's a pretty picture of a tree. Look at that beautiful sunset. It was more about what's the story. And sometimes it was like a picture of something that might not have a story. So I would talk about what was happening behind me when I took the picture on the postcard. Whether, it could be, and sometimes it might be just a total lie. But
Right, but it made a good story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't know.
Right. And then, so for me, the thing that's real interesting about that, again, is this thing where I think in order to do what you do and to do what you've done since you were a kid is have your eyes open and be open to this kind of thing. And I think so many people spend their whole lives not paying attention to that kind of thing. Either they don't see it. I wonder what it was. Have you ever thought about like what it was about you that made you particularly interested in those things?
It's probably a few things now that we talk. When you're talking like this and you start evaluating yourself and thinking about it, and then you come up with like theories. And I suppose the theory is, to a certain extent, we moved a lot. I didn't need the company of other people to be happy. Most people do. It didn't bother me to be alone or with people. I need one person, like Leah, my wife, is my person. So even if nobody else talked to me, I'm going to talk to her at the end of every day, So that's enough. for me. Another thing is probably not interested in money, not interested in sports. I was never interested in any of those team effort things. Now I can work with people, but I don't really believe in the idea of like that one leader that tells everybody else what to do. I'm more like, I'm sure if we can just stay calm, we can all collectively figure this out. And it's like, yeah, you do need a leader if you need people to not think and just drone forward, sure. But I'm not interested in that. So I suppose all those things are like, I'm not interested in money. I'm interested in the connection with the individuals and how can I connect with individuals on a more massive scale. And it's like, well, if I'm mailing out 100 postcards a month, and I did, there were people that once the internet happened, there would be people that owned a website that I thought that is wild stuff. And I would get the mailing address that was connected to the website and start mailing postcards there. Eventually, I know I'm skirting from the what do you think it was? I think it was all of these things of not being interested in I think most people are like, hey, I got to save this money. I've got to save for this vacation. And the vacation is the only thing that I do that year. Everything else is shit. I go to work. I don't really care to work in the warehouse I work in. So that car I buy or that vacation I take is all I have, or football on the weekends or whatever. Where I'm more like, I may not take a vacation. So every day there needs to be at least an hour of a vacation, something I want to do. And so instead of taking a lunch and going to lunch with a bunch of people, it's like, no, I'm going to go drive around to an area that who knows what I might see. And then that is exciting. So, and that keeps me going. I don't ever get tired of that, or I get tired of everything else, but I don't get tired of that. So like all those things I believe are it's just what keeps me going, what's interesting to me. God, I'm all over the place. I'm trying to go back to what I was just about to say.
I'm totally okay with that.
There was something about, there were people that I mailed postcards to that when I realized when the internet happened, and then I started mailing postcards to people, and then of course I had a website. I think I bought Uber Photo is a website that I think I bought in like 1999, and I still have it. So Uber Photo was my postcard website. And what I started doing was I just got a stamp made, and if I mailed you a postcard, it would say Uber Photo on it, along with the other stuff that I would write on it. And then you could go to a website. But the website was completely private, and it would just have the postcards that I had mailed. So if you were the first time receiver of a postcard and you went to Uber Photo, you'd be like, oh, there's like 100 other postcards on here. Now there's the one I received, and then you could easily click it together of like, oh, this is some kind of postcard project. But there still wasn't any information about why or who I am. And then one day I got an email from somebody that was really upset because they thought that I was an ex-student of theirs that was targeting them and threatening them. They misinterpreted a photo of a tomato laying on a curb that someone discarded. They didn't like tomatoes. They got a sandwich and they threw their tomato. So, I wrote about that on the card. They interpreted that. They didn't misinterpret. Their version of that story was someone was going to throw tomatoes at their house because they had done something to someone. And then I realized that, oh, okay, I don't want to make people scared or fearful. So I put on the website, I put a statement. Still didn't put my name, but I put a statement. And then it happened again where I heard a teacher. I've been to like 6 universities after that MCA thing, and 140 or so hours of credit, but no degree because I just can't stick with it. Most of them in cultural anthropology. So one of my anthropology teachers, I really liked him, so I started mailing postcards to him, and I heard him talking in the hallway about these weird postcards, and it was very unnerving for him. And I was like, son of a bitch. I'm going to have to be transparent about all of this now. The world is different. The internet, all that stuff just made everything different. So much communication lead to interpretations that were, if you're a fearful person, this is going to be a fearful thing, you know? So then I made it more transparent and open. So if you went to the website, you were one of the lucky few, you know, and here's the project and here's what's going on.
Now, how did you explain it? Just out of curiosity.
You know, I probably gave a little history and bio about who I, you know, like, hey, I'm a you know, photographer. Here's where this started. It was probably just a little short one paragraph. AI didn't exist, and I am not a great writer, so it was really the facts of like, this is out of a wonderful, innocent sharing of art and story and whatever. And if you aren't comfortable, send me an email. I'll stop sending them to you. So it put it in their hands to not. And then I started. I would always have like at least a dozen photos in an envelope with a stamp on it, and I started sticking them underneath tables at restaurants, you know, with poster putty. And eventually, the poster putty is going to fail and it's going to fall on the ground. It could be a week, it could be forever, or it could be some kid finds it. And so that was kind of fun because every once in a while I'd get an email from people saying, I found this photo underneath this table at an Applebee's, and you know, mainly would do it when I was traveling, or a Cracker Barrel or whatever. And I love that. I think that was maybe what I was chasing the most, was that random, like it's a message in a bottle. It is a message in a bottle. That's what it was. I did that as a kid, tie messages to balloons and let them go. Put messages in bottles and throw them in ditches that I thought, hey, the water, it's raining, the river, the ditch is high. I'm going to throw a message in a bottle in it. All that stuff was probably like a message in a bottle now that I think about it.
I like that because, I mean, the other thing that you said, you were talking about kind of an innocent sharing. And I think for sure that comes from like an innocent intent, you know, and like you were saying, that other people, if they were to experience it and they are looking at it from a particularly fearful lens, then that's how they're going to interpret it, you know. And so you think it was just kind of an innocence on your part, you know, like when you were saying you overheard this teacher that you really liked in the hallway talking about, and you were like, damn, right.
Yeah.
Like it was one of those things that was just kind of a part of your temperament.
Yeah, I'm not interested in making someone uncomfortable. Same with if I'm taking a portrait, it's like I want the person to feel good about the image of them. I'm not as interested in normally what I'll do in something, if it's a portrait I want to take of someone, I will say, hey, I want to take a picture you like. And then once we achieve that, then I'm like, okay, now I want to take a picture that I want. And at that point, they're okay with it because we've built a trust. You know, so that's kind of one example of just the thoughtfulness of other humans. I'm not interested in collaborating because of trying to extort something, or what do you call it when you exploit? Exploitation is like a real. It took me a long time to photograph people intently, like on purpose, because of that idea of exploitation. Like, I'm drawn to a lot of people that look different, but I don't want to say, hey, you look weird. Can I take your picture? You have to build a relationship with people. So seriously, a lot of times I want to build a relationship with them. That's not easy. So I just have to introduce myself or somehow, you know, tell somebody something, whether it's just like, man, I love that jacket. Where'd you get that jacket? And like, then start the conversation. And it might be a year before I actually take a picture of them, because by then I know them, and we've made some kind of connections, even if it's at music shows or art openings, or I mean, that kind of stuff doesn't happen as much anymore because I'm older and busier and all the other stuff that winds up taking up your time. But you know, like 10 years ago, that might have been, you know, more of a thing that would work. So it's difficult when there's so many things I see daily that I want to take a picture of, but ethically I just can't.
Side note, so our department chair is Gary Golightly now, and because our other department chair stepped down, and so he's sort of the interim department chair. And so I have this thing that I do every semester where I do a pop quiz with my students, and basically it's a way of saying, hey, this is what we call the chain of command. You have a problem in my class, you talk to me. If I tell you to get bent, then you go talk to the department chair, and then I say it's Gary, you know. And so I don't know if you know this or not, but Gary Golightly doesn't have any pictures on the internet.
Oh.
I know. It's weird as shit. And I got Katrina. I told Katrina this, and of course she is like Google sleuth.
Oh, didn't know that.
And so I was like, yeah, Gary doesn't have any fucking pictures anywhere on the internet. I mean, the only ones that I could find are a picture that you took at a rock show and then a picture of Gary when he's a kid, and a picture of Gary, I think, in his family that was taken maybe 20 years ago. And these are literally the only pictures of Gary on the internet. And so my picture that I showed my students was the picture that you took. I think it might have been at the antenna. And it's like all these people that are like, you know, Memphis people, you know, like I think Bart Shannon's there and his wife, and two or three other people whose names I'm blanking on right now. And then there's Gary, kind of in the background. It's not even a picture of Gary.
Yeah, he's just in the crowd.
It's just a picture of this group. And so, like, on my presentation, there's this, like, PowerPoint circle around Gary with no beard, and then an arrow, like, pointing at Gary and being like, this is the department chair. You know, this is Gary Golightly. Because Gary doesn't even have the official...
At University of Memphis.
He doesn't even have the official University of Memphis photograph that they made us all take. I didn't take mine. But he didn't even have that. And so, anyway, that was the side note for you taking pictures of people. And one of them happened to be Gary at a show. Yeah. And that's the only one that I could find. It was on your page.
That's funny.
Now, thinking about that, though, so... At some point, so first of all, we're not going to get to everything. One day we're going to come back in here and we'll get to the rest of the stuff. But one thing I do want to talk about before we get out of here today is when I think about you, and the cool thing about the internet is that anybody who is on Facebook can go through and look at the gajillion pictures that you have on there in these albums. And one of the things I'm really struck by with that is such a diversity in the kinds of images that you take and the kinds of places that you are. Is there a particular kind of thing that you feel like you're drawn to more than others?
No, I think you've alluded to that. You've asked that question a couple times today, and I've always gone in a wild direction. So let me try to stay on task here for this ending. I don't have. If it's interesting, I want to photograph it. It's not about I'm looking for an abandoned place. When I go to these abandoned places, I mean, I've always done that too since the 80s. But the thing that I'm really looking for, I'll photograph the building and I'll photograph stuff but it's so mundane. It's like I've seen this picture a million times, but I'm still going to take it because I'm here and I'm just going to document it. But what I'm really looking for is the stuff the people left. You know, like the heights, you know, if somebody scratched their height on a corner, or a kid wrote on the back of their door in the bedroom, or stuff like that. That's what I'm really looking for. But it's not because I want to see anything specific. It's because I don't know what I'm going to see. And when it comes to, like, what am I looking for? Well, I'm always looking on the ground because you never know what people are going to drop. I'm always looking. If I stop at a red light, I'm looking out the window to see if there's anything that's been pressed into the asphalt, because I started looking for that 20 years ago. No, 30 years ago, I saw a spark plug smashed in the asphalt in front of the arcade restaurant in 1991, and I took a picture of it, and then I thought, oh, I wonder what else is stuck in the asphalt. So for 34 years, I also have been taking pictures of stuff stuck in asphalt. I could have a complete exhibit and fill up the gallery full of things stuck in asphalt. And they range from Luke Skywalker keychain to harmonicas, combs, bottle caps, needle nose pliers, anything and everything. Cadillac hood ornaments. So the answer is anything and everything interesting. And the good thing about that is when you go out in the world and you take a different route everywhere, like don't take the same route to Kroger, take a different route, because you never know. Take the long way home, because there could be a car on fire. There could be uh, you just never know. I don't want to go to the drastic things of a car on fire. I saw a guy being pulled by his dog on a weird three-legged scooter called a flicker. I remember because my kids had one, and he had his dog tied to it, and he was being pulled down Summer Avenue the other day. But I couldn't get to it fast enough, so I just had to be happy with seeing it. You know, that kind of sucks.
Well, I mean, thinking about that, what do you there is this thing again about your work to me that I really love, and that is to be able to experience that kind of discovery. Like as the viewer, I'm able to experience that kind of discovery or that kind of finding that is particular to your
Mm.
experience. And to me, one of the things that I really like about that is that over time, I think we as viewers begin to understand, maybe not necessarily you, but understand the things that you're drawn to. And is that, I mean, and then this is another thing about this project, is that I'm doing it as a 53-year-old, and some of the people that I'm talking to I've known for a long time. And so knowing you, I think, when we were 19 would be radically different than knowing you now and sort of paying attention to you in the way that I pay attention to things as an older person. And so, is that something that you're also, as we begin to gray and we begin to age, is that something that you think about at all?
I think as I get older, what I start to think about is what the hell am I going to do when I can't walk?
Right.
You know, I'm stuck with that a little bit more than I should be. I'm struggling with how the past, mistakes in the past can invade your present. And I try to not think about that, you know, whether it be something you said to somebody. I'm super sensitive to about like feeling horrible about maybe I snapped at somebody 23 years ago and I just feel bad about it, you know? So I'm like, and then if I see them, they don't even remember me doing it. Once again, I'm getting off task here. What I really wanted to say when you said all that is also thank you for all the kind words. I really do appreciate you. I don't see people a lot, and it's not out of because I don't want to. It's just like I go to bed at 9:30, unless there's something crazy to do, piques my interest. But you mentioned, well, we start to see a pattern or things that you're interested in. I'd almost say, you tell me, what am I interested in?
Right, right. I mean, I think, that's interesting too. I mean, I think that could be like we were talking about having a series on Freddie. I think we could have a whole series on people who are close to you or who are connected to you in a way. And then also thinking about the kinds of pictures that you take at particular points in their lives. I mean, I think that's a really powerful part of what you do. But I also think to sort of backtrack a little bit, thinking about that show that we did at Material, where you printed off billions of pictures and we hung them and destroyed our nerve endings and our thumbs forever.
That's
But
right.
like those pictures, I remember looking through those pictures and I saw pictures of Michael Donahue when it was 30 years ago, or
Mm.
I remember seeing pictures of your kids when they were super tiny, and the parts of time where my kids and your kids overlapped, in ways, and then also like particular touch tone moments, whether it's a rock show or whether it's a birthday party or things like that, but also the things where as a viewer I also get an insight into your life, where I can see, your kids growing up, we can
Yeah.
see you fixing cars and you building America before it was really a thing, and all of that stuff seems like, and this is again going to your you say obsessively collecting. To me, it's this documenting, and for me, the great thing about that show was that it wasn't just music, it wasn't just art, but it was music, art, and there was this really great thing where you could see not the same people in every picture, but there was a current or a thread that would kind of go
Yeah.
through there. and as much as, and one day I want to sit down and we can talk about the quarantine pictures, but like in the same way that when I was looking at those quarantine pictures, you know, it'd be like, oh, well, shit, there's one of my paintings in the background. Who is that person that has a painting?
Yeah.
And oh, I
Yeah.
know that person, but I didn't know that Jamie knew that person, or, you know, like that kind of thing. And so I think for sure there is a an audience that gets a lot out of your pictures because we're a part of that subculture or we're a part of that cross section. But also, I think people who are outside of that really get a flavor or a sense of the kind of community that happens in Memphis, not just with music, not just with art, but kind of across this kind of midtown spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And is that something that you, because, you know, as we get older, we look at the stuff we've done and we're like, oh, yeah, I did this, you know, or I did that. Is that something that's kind of in your head at all?
I guess you made me think really about I don't think it's very difficult to think of a plan of a theme, let's say, or a plan, and then make it happen.
Right.
It's very difficult to do that. It's like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to think of a whole concept and then make it happen. I think it makes more sense for most people to get busy doing whatever it is you do. And if you incorporate it, and like in my case, it's easy for me to say, hey, I can incorporate photography into everything I do. I don't have my camera here right now, damn it. It's in the other room. But I should have been taking a damn picture. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I'll be right back in a minute.
Right.
But, and then you see the pattern over time because you've been doing it over time. Like, it's kind of what you just mentioned. I can look at all these pictures that might have happened over the course of 5 years at that time or whatever. But, and then you go, oh, there might be 10 different patterns, but they're constantly happening randomly all the time. Today, it might be this, and tomorrow it might be I'm going to drive around and take pictures of the river, and then the next day it may be, oh, my kid's got a school function and I'm going to photograph that. But it's still the pattern, even though I may say, oh, I don't have a normal schedule. I don't, but I still have a pattern. Everybody does, even if it's erratic. So I think it's just you can see the pattern. If, like, when we had that exhibit, it was a lot. So you could wind up seeing even the color pattern. You know, take your glasses off and squint, and then you're like, oh, I know what filters he uses or whatever.
Right.
So I think it's kind of like that. Just do what you do, and the pattern will emerge. Whether you're a research person that's science research or you repair things, you have a way to repair things. And if you looked at enough of your repairs, it's kind of like that joke about, not a joke, it's kind of a joke to me, a weird thing about, like, in movies, you're like, oh, there's a bomb that somebody left in a building. Oh, I can see the signature moves of this bomb maker. I've seen it before.
Right.
It's the same thing, really.
Right.
It's like, I'm going to make a photograph the same.
Right. Which I think, like, that we, again, that thing about that you talked about, how, like, you didn't necessarily say, this is going to be the thing that I do, you know, for the next 40 years or whatever it was. And so for me, the thing that's so great about being older is being able to look back at the stuff that we didn't mean to do, but that we did. You know, like, I don't think Nan Golden in the moment set out to document the AIDS crisis and the club kid culture in New York City in the 1980s and early 90s. She definitely did not, like, that wasn't the goal.
Yeah.
But damn if that wasn't what happened, you know?
Yeah.
And so, like, in the same way that I think that happened, but I think, again, being older and sort of sitting back and looking at and having a kind of rear view mirror view of it. And then also, I hope that in the way that you were thinking about this kind of innocent generosity, this kind of connection and touch tone, like, for me, one of the things that I really like about your practice is that, or one of the things that I hope about that you get out of your practice, is that you recognize the impact that you've made in this documentation of this very particular point in time in the city, not just with, again, art people, music people, but across this particular spectrum. And to me, I think that's a thing that for the most part, what we do is thankless. You know, like we do this stuff, and like you said, you're not thinking about putting anything in any galleries or doing anything like this, or getting awards or grants or anything like this. But I think for sure we do it, and we do put it in the world. And even if it's not a thing that pays our bills regular, I hope that you get the sense that what you've done is really important, and really impactful in terms of thinking about your connection to your city, and also what your city and your viewers get out of these images. Whether that's like something that will feed your soul at the time when you need it, I don't know, but I think that's a really important thing for you to carry with you.
It does. I mean, I definitely, when I'm around people, like last night we had an art opening here, and I haven't been at a big thing like that in a long time. I don't think anybody has for a while. And I got to see so many people and get to hug so many people. And then you start to realize, oh man, there's so many people I'm connected with, even people I don't know, because I only met them once for 15 minutes 4 years ago. But it made a big impact on them. And I knew it did because we were all scared and stuck. And I wasn't, because I had a reason to leave every day, all day. Speaking of the quarantine project thing, it was like, for 2.5 months, I got to leave every day, all day. I was alone in the car, but I got to see people for 15 minutes, and I could tell that they were like, thank God this broke up this day for our kids or for us or whatever. And then there's a thing that we made. And also, if I came to your house, I took 3 different versions, and I emailed you a link, so they got to have, there's one picture of each person in the book, but in the link that they got, there was like 30. So they got to see and have all those. So those were, yeah. I do feel that, and we all, despite how, I don't have a huge ego, but everybody has an ego. And I'm not driven by my ego, I don't think. But it is nice to be recognized and felt validated sometimes. And I would love to get a call from somewhere and them like, yes, we want to reprint this book and we love it and let's do it. Oprah loves it. That would be amazing. But I don't want that bad enough to be mailing. I haven't mailed any books out to publishers. I still have 800 of those. I could be like really marketing that to try to send it to any connection everywhere, from magazine people or whatever. But unfortunately, it's not a big driving force, so I don't do it. But anyway, I don't know where else. Was that your alarm?
That was. Now the cool thing is, so that's the end.
Yeah.
And that was the first of 2 interviews with Jamie Harmon. It was recorded on February 10th, 2022. Please stay tuned, or rather, please tune in next week. Spoiler alert, it's going to be part 2 of 2 interviews with Jamie Harmon. Thank you for listening.